final section of the first loop of the race back to an optional stop at race headquarters at the Leidenburg Rugby Club was bordered by the R540 and the R36 national roads. There were numerous spectator points along a spectator-friendly route, and enthusiasts were certainly getting value for money.
The route took in some spectacular scenery, which was lost on crews who had other matters to worry about. Still leading the production vehicle field were Duncan Force and Rob Howie in the Team Castrol Toyota Hilux. They were ahead of Hannes Grobler and Hedy Tersteger in the RFS BMW X3, with the crew having a little trouble with the route. They weren't the only ones struggling in the long grass, with Herman and Wegard Zouwald and Marius and Jolinde Fourie at odds with the roadbook and GPS navigation aid.
Conditions in the tall grass was enough to tax even the sharpest of co-drivers, and by the time Hannes Grobler and Hedy Tersteger finally got it all sorted out and were once again pointing in the right direction, the RFS BMW pair were nearly a minute behind Foss and Howie.
The Regent Racing pair of Mike Whitehouse and Matthew Carlson had strayed off the route, along with South African champions Cully and Quinton Zouwald, who had led the special vehicle category for most of the morning. After Whitehouse and Carlson had performed a three-point turn to give the Zouwalds the right of way, the two crews then disappeared in different directions. The Zouwalds went straight, and after some deliberation, the Regent Racing crew decided left was the way to go.
The special vehicle lead had now switched to Herman and Wegard Zouwald in the Zouwald Racing SVR, with the Palabora-based pair being chased by the impressive Marius and Jolinde Fourie in the PHB Bat. The Fouries were well in control of Class B and holding off Mike Whitehouse and Matthew Carlson, who had quietly chipped away at the cars ahead of them. Right behind the Regent Racing Navara were Gary Berthold and Andre Vermeulen, who'd broken a fan belt and were nursing the Atlas Copco Toyota. Cully and Quinton Zouwald were back on the right route and pushing hard to regain lost ground, with Naim Mosaji and Rehan Bodhanya having a good first outing of the year 2011.
Jannie Visser and Joks Leroux were again showing impressive form and holding on to a strong fifth overall in the SP class. The Northwest crew were holding off Johan van Staden and James Rousseau, who were battling with the brake problem and falling into the clutches of Bula Bottas and Johan Pretorius, who were having a steady run in the Bottas Vervoer Bat.
Swaziland crew John Thompson and Clinton McNamara were trying to narrow a considerable gap to Class B leaders Marius and Jolinde Fourie. At the same time, reigning South African production vehicle champions Chris Visser and Japie Badenhorst were starting to work their way up the leaderboard in the Team Ford Racing Ranger TDCI. Jacques Wheeler and Siegfried Rousseau were in the same boat in the Orange Works Bat, with the pair also gradually chipping away at the cars ahead of them. Behind them, Nick Gosler and Joe Lima were putting in a strong showing in Class P in the Men's Health International Zarco. They'd moved ahead of Don Thompson and Wayne Foster, who were struggling with a damaged exhaust.
A little further back, Peter Ruthven and Rudy Brits were going along steadily in the Rubicon Toyota Hilux. Trying to haul in the Toyota were Thomas Rundle and John Moore, with the Baden Tyre Services Nissan Navara pair losing some time to an early puncture and having to wait their turn at a river crossing. That dropped them down the pecking order, and they were running just ahead of Class D leaders Dion Venter and Ian Palmer in the 4x4 Mega World Toyota Hilux. Kutsia Labuskaghni and daughter Sandra held a narrow lead in Class B in the Raysonic Zarco, but that was to disappear when they pulled over for a quick running repairs.
While the Labuskaghnis were stationary, Keith and Andrew Maganete nipped into the Class B lead in the Zarco, with Class E leaders Gene Boshoff and Lothar Klein chasing after them in their LG Toyota Hilux.
Stopping at the pit area at the end of the first loop was optional, and the time clock was running for teams who pulled in for running repairs. Hugo and Jaap de Bruin were forced to retire with front suspension and power steering damage, while Herman and Wegard Zouwald stopped for a gearbox check. They were also running repairs for the two factory Ford Rangers of Chris Visser and Japie Badenhorst and Lance Woolridge and Ward Huxtable, and back in the pits were Anthony Taylor and Chris Birkin.
Back on the route, production vehicle leaders Duncan Foss and Rob Howie were on the second of three loops that made up the race. Foss and Howie were headed for the compulsory 15-minute halt at the DSP, with the Castrol Toyota Hilux sounding healthy, and matters were looking rather rosy for the pair. Behind the Toyota, SA champions Cully and Quinton Silwalt were back in the special vehicle lead in the elegant fuel bat, with Class P leaders Marius and Yolinda Fourie running second overall in yet another impressive performance from the husband and wife team.
Almost unnoticed, Mike Whitehouse and Matthew Carlson had crept up the leaderboard in the Region Racing Nissan Navara. They were nearly 4 minutes behind Force and Howie, but had a sniff of a possible victory. Whitehouse and Carlson had a 12-second cushion over third place Hannes Grobler and Henny Terstegen, and sandwiched between the two SP class cars were Herman and Vigat Soewald, who were battling electrical and gearbox problems. With the car cutting out and gear selection a problem, it was turning into an adventurous outing for the Soewalds, while Grobler and Terstegen looked to be comfortable enough in the diesel-powered RFS BMW.
The East Rand pair of Bula Boitis and Jan Pretorius had quietly and unobtrusively worked their way through the field into a top 5 place. They'd moved ahead of last year's winners Johan van Staden and James Rousseau, who were struggling to make the Atlas Copco bat stop. Their brakes were giving them a hard time. Another crew slowly working their way into a potential top 5 finish was Jacques Wheeler and the experienced Siegfried Rousseau in a mature performance in the Orange Works bat. For Johan van Staden, well, he was just pleased to have the Atlas Copco bat on slightly drier ground.
Sy help. Jy kan nie beheer as jy inkom nie. Hy sê oral te oor en ja. Toe skiet ons maar in hom in. So dat ek hom tot hier om reg te kan maak, want daar is net honder gesprom en nou is ons aan die gang.
Problems for Johan van Staden and James Rousseau, and hard work for Thomas Rundle and Jean Moore, who were steadily working their way back into contention, were still 37 minutes behind the leaders. It was smoother going for Nick Gosler and Joe Lima, who prepares the Men's Health International Zarco, although the motor was sounding a little rough. Peter Ruthven and Rudy Brits were soldiering on in the Rubicon Toyota Hilux, but had a few anxious moments when the Toyota foundered in a deep ditch.
Luckily, forward motion was once again restored, but Ruthven and Brits were to end their race upside down after a roll on the final loop. KwaZulu-Natal crew Clint Gibson and Gary Campbell were having a solid run in the Gibson Racing SVR, and behind them a great tussle developed between brothers David and Gary White in the Rokon Bat and Chris Visser with Jaapie Badenhorst, who were on the move in the factory Ford Racing Ranger. After an earlier unscheduled pit stop to clean water tubes, the South African champions had the bit between their teeth and had fought back to close in on a podium finish, something which had looked unlikely earlier in the race.
Former South African champion Evan Hutchison had a disappointing 2010, and he and new co-driver Dani Stassen made a dodgy start to their 2011 campaign in the 4x4 Motorride Revo. Hutchison desperately needed a finish and was on track to end a disappointing run of results. Although they were more than an hour behind the leaders, Potchefstroom-based Dewald van Breda and Johan de Klerk were also making a solid start to their season in the Potch Plastics Toyota Hilux, with the vehicle starting life in Class D before being upgraded to SP class specifications.
Kutsiela Beskachny and daughter Sandra were back in the Class B lead in the Raconic Zarco and looked to be going along comfortably enough. They'd seen off the challenge of brothers Keith and Andrew Machanete, while early Class D leaders Dion Venter and Ian Palmer had retired the 4x4 Mega World Toyota Hilux with a broken differential. Father and son Jack and Sarel Oosthuizen, who last year took a step up from the Northern Regions Championship into the ABSA National Series, suddenly found themselves the only Class D survivors in a Land Rover that was still sounding decidedly healthy and ready for more punishment.
A string of Class C contenders had also fallen by the wayside, with Dirk Putter and Chris Claessens leading the way in a Toyota Hilux.
At the DSP, we caught up with Toyota SA President and Chief Executive Officer Dr. Johan van Zyl and asked about the philosophy behind Toyota's support for motorsport.
Well, we've always used motorsport as a way to project our vehicles to the public. In rally and off-road, we show our vehicles quality, durability and reliability. And that's why we race. And we've always believed if you race on Saturday, maybe you'll sell a few more on Monday.
There had been dramatic twists and turns throughout a fascinating morning, and the third and final loop of the 2011 Toyota Dealer 400 was poised to offer more of the same.